This evening, we're going to start with Nathaniel.
So when I did my reading, the question that I was asking is, why did God choose shepherds? Can everyone hear me okay? Never know how far to hold the mic away. So the question I ask is, why did God choose the shepherds? I mean, he could have chosen like the Levites and the high priest. They were like educated people. They had, copies of the Bible in the temple. They would have known about all the prophecies, and, they could have been told like, hey, this is Jesus. This answers all these prophecies. But no, it was some shepherds in a field that, this was revealed to, which doesn't really make any sense. Just they're shepherds and they probably couldn't even read. And yet God chose these people. And so why did he choose them? Well, I wrote down three things. The shepherds represent us. Literally and figuratively, the shepherds are on the outskirts of civilization. I mean, if you think about who did Jesus talk to? People on the outskirts. He talked to lepers, beggars, prostitutes, tax collectors. These are the hated people. And that's the people that God chose. He chose the shepherds because that represents salvation for all people. It's not just for a privileged few that salvation is made available. I wrote down, rich people cannot buy salvation. The strong people you can't threaten and be like, give me that. Like, they have no power to gain salvation for themselves. And I didn't know quite the word to put down, so I just put, you cannot mingle or network into salvation. I hope that makes sense. I don't know how to, but like rub shoulders with the right people, whatever that is, whatever that word is, you can't do that to get salvation. And then the third thing is, why did they choose the shepherds? The shepherds are unclean. Jesus wasn't revealed to the priests who are, they had all these restrictions and had to be clean, otherwise they'd, die before they went to, the ark and stuff. So they're sinners like everyone else. And then, so the Old Testament says with the laws that you can't be around a dead body. I don't know if that includes animals, but, with agriculture and stuff, animals die, and so the shepherds would have been around dead sheep. I don't know if that counts, but that's what I went with. And then also, these people are out in the wilderness, far away from the temple, so they don't exactly have easy access to, go through the sacrifices and because of sin. So these are the unclean people, and that's who God chose to speak to first, the people in need. And then the last point that I have, when I was reading through my notes, it seems kind of added on. It doesn't really tie together, so maybe one of these two people will be able to fit it together. But it was verses 15 and 16. When the angels went away from them into heaven, the shepherds said to one another, let us go over to Bethlehem and see this thing that has happened, which the Lord has made known to us. 16 is the important one. And they went with haste and found Mary and Joseph and the baby lying in a manger. I don't know much about sheep or being a shepherd, but the part where he says, and they went with haste, makes me think that they just left the sheep and went to go see this baby. And, it reminded me of, the disciples when they were called. They just threw down their nets and whatever they're doing and followed Jesus. It says in Psalm 51 that God does not desire sacrifices or burnt offerings. He wants something real and a relationship. And these people had that devotion that they were willing to throw down what little they had to go after that. So that's my notes.
Awesome. I also thought a lot about the shepherds with this. And I tried to bring them a little bit into today's society, because I don't know about you, what you picture when you think of the shepherds. But a lot of times, a lot of the pictures that we see, Jesus with the lamb on his shoulder, and it's kind of a warm, fuzzy, type feeling with them. And that wasn't really who the shepherds were. Shepherding wasn't an 8-hour job. They took the sheep out to the pasture, and when the sheep had eaten everything, weeks later, they came back in. And otherwise, the shepherds lived out in the field. And I was thinking, okay, so what today? I know some shepherds. They're pretty clean people, so it didn't really carry over. And then I thought back to one of my friends in college who their family raised hogs. And he had gone home for a weekend and he came back. While he was home for the weekend, they cleaned the pit. Okay. Andy, can you move over there? Because have you taken a shower since you cleaned the pit? Oh, yeah, like 5. Over there. Okay. And that's kind of what the shepherds were. It's like, you didn't want to be around them. They stunk. They were dirty. They were grimy. The whole thing. They weren't pleasant people to be around, not because of their personality, but they stunk. And so I kind of think about that. And it also brought to mind a story that I had heard about a missionary in Papua New Guinea. And he was teaching, the New Guineans. They're about Jesus and the Good Shepherd, and they just kind of looked at him like, "What are you talking about?" There aren't any sheep in New Guinea. They didn't know what a shepherd was. And so he turned it, and he said, well, Jesus is the good pig herder. Because they had pigs. They knew what it meant to be a good pig herder. And so they talked, they made that connection there of, the herder of the animals. So I thought that was kind of an interesting part. And then I put those two thoughts together. The angels came and talked to the shepherds who were dirty and disgusting and, that whole concept. And then later in his ministry, Jesus says, I'm the good shepherd. And it seems kind of contradictory. If we look at shepherds as the lowly, as the dirty, as the, stay away from us type people. And then Jesus says, I'm the good shepherd and you're my sheep. And really elevates that level of the lowliness. Uses that as an example of his love. So that kind of struck me with what Nathaniel has said too. Pastor Joe, do you have anything to add with that?
Yeah,
You don't have to.
I don't have to.
No.
Well, it's the question, which direction to go? Because you guys are right. Why the shepherds? They weren't educated. I've heard them actually described as they were next to animals. They were isolated. They were separate from the rest of the environment. And at the same time, though, they were also those who knew how to care for someone else. That was their job. Their job was to care. Their job was to demonstrate compassion and to pay attention and to watch the flock. And the shepherd knew his flock, and they knew their sheep. And I think of the way my dad knows his cattle, and he knows when something's going on. He knows each, and Bruce is nodding his head. You can just tell. They don't even need computers. This modern technology wasn't necessary because they watched. Mm-hmm. When it says they watched the flock, they really watched them. 99 were there, one was missing. They knew the one that was missing. And I think about that, all of these levels of, the negatives, but then also there's some pretty serious positives with shepherds that really reflect God in ways that, the Levites, throughout their history, they were kind of failures. Mm-hmm. Hate to say it, almost like pastors nowadays. But yeah, it wasn't an easy job being a shepherd. No. And to have God call them then to be the first ones to see the Messiah is quite an honor. God really redeemed that position.
I also think of another Bethlehem shepherd, and that'd be King David, who God chose the smallest, dirtiest, stinkiest of the tribe to be the king of Israel. So,
Yeah, that is an interesting point that, shepherds are thought of as lowly, yet their best king started out as a shepherd.
Yep.
It's funny it works that way.
Another thing that kind of stuck out to me as I was reading this, when the angels are talking to the shepherds, and they say, "This will be a sign for you, and you will find a baby wrapped in swaddling cloths and lying in a manger." And it kind of, so Pastor Joe has mentioned many times, if it's in the Bible, it's there for a reason. Okay? And it struck me that the phrase in the swaddling cloths was included with that, because they could have just said, "And you'll find a baby in a manger," which would be pretty amazing in itself. So why the swaddling cloths? What does that tell us? As I looked into it, there's nothing real unique about swaddling cloths. Swaddling cloths were used by the poor. They were used by the upper class. There were strips of cloth that a child would be wrapped in, a newborn would be wrapped in, and wrapped tightly to give that feeling of the embracement that the newborn would feel from just coming out of the womb. It was a common practice to be swaddled. So why? There's nothing unique about it. It wasn't like, okay, so this is going to be a poor baby because they have swaddling cloths instead of Gucci cloths. It was a common thing there. So one of the things that it pointed out to me is by saying the baby's in swaddling cloths, it means it's a newborn. It's very young. So that's pointing that out. A second thought is the fact that Mary had the swaddling cloths meant that she was prepared. She was ready for this baby. It wasn't a fluke type thing. I mean, when you think you're going to find a baby laying in a manger, that doesn't sound like a lot of preparation went into it. It's kind of like we're going to bring the baby home and throw it in a dresser drawer, which, by the way, my nephew slept the first nights in a dresser drawer. But, it sounds like there wasn't any planning to it, and yet here it was very much planned out. And then the third part of that is it wouldn't be hard to find a baby in Bethlehem. And it wouldn't be real hard to find the baby in swaddling cloths somewhere. But to find a baby in swaddling cloths in an animal feed trough, you can't miss that. And so it was a very clear sign to the shepherds, when you find this, this is who we're talking about. Anything?
No, that's information I didn't know on swaddling cloths. I know that when the Bible was translated into Quechua in Ecuador, they used the word they used was for swaddling cloths but the natives wanted to use diapers, the word for diapers, because they wanted to associate Jesus with kingship rather than with the poor. But they ended up using the word for swaddling cloths, and that meant a lot to the people because they were able to connect with that. Mm-hmm. But I didn't know about I was ignorant. Beth?
One time I read in a book, it was a fictional book, but that person suggested that the shepherds that were on the hills by Bethlehem, which isn't far from Jerusalem, were actually the shepherds that raised the sacrificial lambs for the Passovers. Because people came from quite a ways, and they would, buy their sacrifice lambs.
I've heard that before. Yeah. If you didn't hear what Beth said, that the shepherds in the hills around Bethlehem, because its proximity to Jerusalem, you could actually see from the high parts of Jerusalem, you could see Bethlehem in the distance. So it was very close that those shepherds very likely were raising special sheep that would be taken to the temple to be sacrificed, that people could come and buy. So they'd be sacrificial lambs that were there.
If that's true, then that's significant because they were brought to see the Lamb of God.
Yeah. That's just speculation, but I'd heard the same speculation.
My turn?
Yep.
Unless you had something to add to Jim's, Nathaniel. Nope. Nope? All right. Well, when I was reading through this, two things, well, more than two things, but two things that I'm going to actually talk about caught my attention. First off, when the angels speak to the shepherds, when the angels went away from them into heaven, which probably be one of the reasons why they knew it was angels, shining beings that rise into heaven. I suppose it could be aliens.
I assume it's the rainbow bridge, like from Thor.
Oh,
where
okay.
it just comes down and they go up.
There you go.
I was thinking Star Trek.
Oh, the transporters. Oh, dear. I'll stick with the aliens. But the simplicity of their answer. Let us go to Bethlehem and see this thing that has happened, which the Lord has made known to us. And they went with haste and found Mary and Joseph and the baby lying in a manger. And as I read that, I thought, that's the proper response. When we hear the message of God, in whatever manner we receive that message, like however it's given to us, whether it comes from an angel of the Lord or whether it comes from, a human being, the message of the Lord should be, hey, let's go and check this out. Let's try this out. Because the truths of Christianity aren't just things that we're supposed to be thinking about. Like, that's one of the wonders about Christianity, is that it has a philosophical depth that has changed Europe for millennia, and that people have been meditating on and pondering these truths of Christianity and trying to apply them and figure out what they really mean. And actually, it's been suggested that the reason that Christ was born in the time of, the Hellenization of the Roman Empire, why Greek? Why not Latin? Well, Latin didn't have the theological terminology. Latin was too simple of a language. It didn't have the depth of words that Greek had. And so this stuff was written in Greek, even though it was common Greek, it still had that capacity. And so the philosophical depth of Christianity is just immense. And there's a guy named Philo who actually went so far as to say that the Old Testament writings in Hebrew was even deeper than he was trying to argue with the Greeks, and he was saying that you guys should become Jews because all the Jewish teaching predates all of your guys' teaching, all the Greek teaching. And but that's not the point of Christianity. It has that depth, but that's not the point of it. It's to be practiced. It's to be brought into our lives. Let's test this out. Let's try this out. Let's see how this works. Because what happens when we see how it works? What happens when we actually put it into practice? What would it mean? Well, it was Einstein who said the problem with Christians is that they're not Christian enough. The problem with all other ideologies is that people take it too far. But the problem with Christianity is people don't take it far enough. And, that's quite a saying from Einstein, who's even smarter than Jim.
No.
No, maybe not. He's got better hair.
No.
Yeah. What happens when we put it into practice? And the shepherds returned, glorifying and praising God for all they had heard and seen as it had been told them. And so, the promises that Christianity contains, that Scripture contains for us, really become ours, not when we meditate on them and ponder them and explain them or even teach them, but when we practice them. Because then we see the reality of what has been given us. And that's such, as I was reading through that just came home so powerfully that oftentimes the problem with our worldviews is that they're established by somebody who's theorizing in some ivory tower somewhere, but has never actually tried putting these things into practice. It's like the problem with Marxism or socialism. Every time, it's great ideas. That stuff sounds wonderful. We'll make everybody equal. Yeah, that sounds great. We'll make sure that everyone's got plenty of money. That sounds great until it gets put into practice and it becomes Venezuela, where the average Venezuelan between, 2017 and 2018 lost 17 pounds because they didn't have enough food. What happens when the ivory tower theories get put into practice? They fail. What happens when Christianity gets put into practice?
It works.
It works. And the shepherds returned, glorifying and praising God for all they had seen and heard, as it had been told them. So when we put it into practice, it functions. It works. It satisfies its promises. It creates something greater. It helps us see God, glorifying and praising God. Mm-hmm. And that's just the app. It's just an application. It's not an interpretation, just an application. But this is the reality of Christianity. What an awesome worldview that we have. What an awesome gift we've been given. Something that functions in this world better than any other ideology. Ours actually works. Ours makes things better. Christianity, when properly applied, when applied biblically, that's what I mean when I say properly, when applied biblically, changes people and it changes everything for the better. And other things I could talk about, but it's already 7:50. So you guys got anything to add?
Well, it struck me when you said, the angels come to them, and the response of the shepherds is, "Let's go." And then I picture them going down into Bethlehem. Now, they've just been told that Christ, the Messiah, has been born. And they go down into Bethlehem, and no one else is looking for Jesus. No one else, only the shepherds. They're the only ones that have been told. And you kind of have to think from that. I mean, for myself, so Linda and I pulled in tonight because we were going to run through some music at 6 o'clock. We pulled in and we were just a couple minutes early, and it's like, there's no one here. Are we wrong? Did we get the wrong time? Did we get the wrong place? So then you think about the shepherds. They're coming to see the Messiah, and there's no one here looking for him. So I think that, that's another interesting part with it.
Sounds good.
I guess just the last thought I have with it too is verse 19. But Mary treasured up all those things, pondering them in her heart. This is written by Luke. As far as I know, Luke wasn't with Jesus. Okay? How did Luke get all this? Because Mary remembered everything. And Luke talked to Mary. And Mary said, "Let me tell you how it went." And this is where he says, this is her, this is directly from her. So that's what I see anyway with it. Any thoughts, questions for us?
Or additions?
Earlier we did, stump the pianist. Now we can stump the pastor. This is your chance.
Well, Bruce did that on Sunday with his question.
Yeah.
It was a good question. Finally come up with an answer, but I'm not going to give it right now.
Somewhere I read or was thinking about that the shepherds were looking for a savior, where maybe the high priests weren't. That when the angels came and said this to the shepherds, they were already expecting that and able to receive it.
shepherds looking for a savior, whereas the high priests probably weren't. High priests had the political power and clout, and they had money, and they had ease, and they had luxury, and they had position. They had all them wonderful things. Usually when hardships come, well, what was the African saying? Oh, when elephants fight, it's the grass that suffers. But that's what, who's the grass? It's the shepherds. So who would have been a logical person looking for a savior who had, from God? It would have been the shepherds. I think that would make sense. It would be a logical, conclusion to draw, because they were probably, if the soldiers come through, shepherds can't defend. Well, they, sticks and stones, but that's not going to do a lot against the legion.
No. Yeah, I also think to the educated, the baby being born in a stable and in the poor family and everything, it just doesn't fit. It doesn't make sense. But again, going back to King David, the shepherds knew that one of theirs had become a great king. Why couldn't one of the poor again become a great king? It'd be much easier to accept that thought on faith.
Did the angels only talk to the shepherds, the jealous shepherds?
Seems to be. Yeah, it seems to be that the angels, they only told the shepherds, and only this group of shepherds too, as far as we can tell.
That's why nobody else would look.
Right. Well, and that's, it doesn't say no one else is looking for them, but it doesn't say anyone else did look for them. So that's where I pull that from.
Were you going to say something?
No, I was just gonna say that like the angels spoke to the shepherds, but they also spoke previously to Mary
Right.
too. So like maybe the angel speaking was, so Mary could reflect on all that, like Jim talked about. So.
Well, and it is interesting too that the angels came to the shepherds, but the wise men had to figure it out on their own. And so she said, Kirsten was talking to me about this. I don't remember what day it was this last week, but the shepherds were right there. Mm-hmm. They just had to go down that night. They were able to find them, whereas the wise men, they traveled from afar, in whatever direction exactly they came from. But they had to put the rich and the powerful had to put a lot more work into it in order to come to see the Messiah. Whereas the poor and the lowly, God brought it right to them, right in their midst. And so there's, the cool imagery there, how God, to whom much is given, much is required. Mm-hmm. And he made the wise men struggle. Beth?
But don't you think that Zechariah and Elizabeth were kind of expecting Jesus? And they were in Jerusalem, or where did they live?
Yeah, he was high priest, or he wasn't high priest, sorry. He was a priest and he served in the temple, but that wasn't a continual position. That was a rotating position. And I think, Bruce, you said it when you preached at one of these that I don't
Taken Jesus.
They would have taken him to Jerusalem to the temple,
Yeah.
but Zechariah wasn't necessarily there at that point. Anna and Simeon were at the temple.
Yeah, and so there were people looking for a Messiah. They were waiting for the salvation of Israel. But it was the shepherds that had the direct revelation. He's here now. And, they didn't keep it to themselves either. That's another thing that we have is, I suppose that was another thing that I was thinking about sharing about. All they did was they talked about what they'd seen. That was it. So what does it mean to be a witness? What does it mean to be an evangelist? What does it mean to share the gospel? I just tell other people what you've seen and experienced. You say you haven't seen and experienced anything worthy of telling anybody, it's probably because you haven't put the gospel into practice quite enough.
It says in those days Mary rose and went east into the hill country to a town of Judah, the house of Zechariah.
Okay. So
No name.
hill country, quite a broad area. Judah, quite a broad area. And so, yeah, somewhere in the hills. But that could have just, that's not the Negev. It's not the plains. And so, yeah, so we don't know exactly where Zechariah lived. At least Luke didn't tell us. I'm guessing that's Luke, right?
Yes, that's
Yeah.
Anything else? Thank you, Pastor and Nathaniel.
If you guys find this to be an edifying way of doing this, I've contemplated doing it for Lent. If you would rather just have Bruce preach for Lent, we can do that too, if he agrees. But if you guys like this, if you think this is something we should keep doing for Wednesday night services, special services, just tell us, and we'll keep doing it.